This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
Drive into York, South Carolina, and you'll see street names like Congress, Madison, and Jefferson.
We are a city where you can breathe the history.
Streets lined with historic homes and buildings.
We're the Charleston of the upcountry. I like to say that Charleston is the York of the low country.
Family roots can run deep.
I'm a 7th generation Yorkite.
And today, there's still something drawing people to York.
It would have to be the Southern charm.
Join us for the next half hour as we delve into York's charm and history, the good and not so good. We'll meet an entrepreneur keeping downtown thriving in the tiniest of spaces, a woman who calls a hotel built in 1852 home, and the historians who keep it all in perspective. That's all next on A Trail of History.
The following episode of Trail of History is brought to you by Central Piedmont Community College and viewers like you. Thank you.
Bragg Financial Advisors, a family-owned wealth management firm providing investment management and tax and estate planning for families, individuals, and institutions for more than 50 years, committed to our clients, to education, and our community.
Hello and welcome to A Trail of History. I'm your host, Gary Ritter. Today we're in York, South Carolina, the county seat of York County, which lies just south of Mecklenburg. On this episode, we'll be exploring the history and architecture of York, as well as efforts to preserve the built environment and provide tools for historical research. Turn onto Congress Street in downtown York, and you might feel like you've traveled back in time. It's a classic American Main Street. Many of York's downtown businesses occupy buildings more than 100 years old, and squeezed into one of the smallest, you'll find a woman with a passion for baking and serving up treats.
I'm Terry Krieger, and I'm the owner of On the Rise Bakery. Everything that you eat here is good for you.
When Krieger bought this tiny 600 square foot building, sandwiched between two much more substantial structures, she also bought a small piece of York history.
The alley buildings are stores that you'll see in almost any city, where originally there were alleys that separated the main buildings. The alleys were there to serve multiple purposes. One was a fire stop to help firefighting, just to provide a gap between buildings.
But that history comes with challenges.
They're narrow, and you have to figure out how to configure your store. But they got closed in over time when all you had to do is put in 2 walls and a roof and you were done.
It was just a shell when I moved in. We have actually rearranged this place about 3 or 4 times. We've had to. At first it was just this long, narrow walkway. It was like, I don't like the way that feels. And so we tried it another way. And several of our York stores actually that are still here started in this building. And when I bought it, I was very determined that it was going to stay in the family, even if I outgrew it and went somewhere else. I love this place. It's got my heart and soul in it.
On the Rise Bakery fits right in with York's small-town charm. And while a relative newcomer, Krieger says there's just something about York.
There's a magic with the people. They just are, I guess if you would think about Southern charm, and I'm not a Southerner, I'm originally from Ohio, but it would have to be the Southern charm. The manners are still here.
Venture off Congress and you'll find large and small historic homes along the tree-lined streets of York. They're part of the cultural legacy left by generations who have called this place home. The job of researching that legacy falls to historian Michael Scoggins and the staff at the Historical Center of York County and the Southern Revolutionary War Institute.
Well, the Historical Center of York County has a number of important resources that are available to the public. First of all, we have a lot of the early York County records, the deed books, the will books, a lot of these things. We either have the originals or we have them on microfilm, and they're there for the public to use. And the Southern Revolutionary War Institute is unique in most of the states in the South or even on the Eastern Seaboard don't have anything like that. A public facility that's dedicated to the research of the Revolutionary War is a rare thing in this part of the country.
But that's just the first 265 years or so of the area's history. It actually goes back much, much further.
Human beings have been living in this area of South Carolina, the Carolina Piedmont, for at least 12,000 years that we know of. When you get into the 17th century with the beginning of European settlement in South Carolina, they made contact with the Native American tribes, and that's when we first start hearing names like Catawba and Cherokee and Wateree and Congaree and Utahs and Esau's and Waxhaws and all these early tribes. But certainly the Catawba and the Cherokee here in the Carolina Piedmont were the ones that had the greatest impact on the early settlers. There was a network of early roads running through here. This town of York began as a crossroads, basically, and there were a number of colonial roads which were originally Indian trading paths that ran through this area and intersected here where the town of York is now.
About 18 miles east of York, you'll find Fort Mill and the Ann Springs Close Greenway. There you'll find a 200-pound stone marker that was a directional guide for travelers. In the late 1700s, this was known as the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road, or Nations Ford Road from Pennsylvania. This road led to the Nations Ford crossing on the Catawba River. Roads like this were used by European settlers migrating into the South Carolina backcountry. Jane Hart has lived here her entire life.
I'm a 7th generation Yorkite. My people came over, my first set, during the reign of King George, and were given a land grant down the road a ways. The other side of my family came Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego Inman came later on in the right before the Revolution. Abednego met some lovely girl, and here I sit.
Ask around York and you'll hear similar stories. Mayor of York and Winthrop University history professor, Dr. Eddie Lee.
We have deep roots. My family's roots go back to the 1760s in this area. I had a 16-year-old ancestor at Kings Mountain back in 1780. On that fateful day, October the 7th, 1780. We've got deep roots, but I'm not the only one. All of us have deep roots in this area. We're proud of that, our heritage.
As settlers moved into the area, some were confused about whether they lived in colonial North Carolina or South Carolina.
In 1772, the boundary west of the Catawba was finally surveyed, and this area officially became part of South Carolina because technically it had been acquired from North Carolina.
And after the American Revolution, life in the Carolina backcountry became more structured.
And it's known as the New Acquisition District during the Revolutionary War. 1785, the South Carolina legislature creates the counties of South Carolina, the original counties, of which York County is one, and they mandated the establishment of a courthouse and a jail here and the establishment of a county government with just appointed justices of the peace, clerk of court, and a sheriff. It was all Revolutionary War officers that took those early offices. Men like William Bratton and William Hill were justices of the peace, and they had led the militia in the Revolution. Another militia officer, John McCall, became the first clerk of court. James Hawthorne, one of the heroes of the Battle of Kings Mountain, became the first sheriff. So these men established York County and the York court system. And with the establishment of that court system and a courthouse here in 1786, that's really when the village of York, later the town of York, starts its roots and begins to grow from that.
And since 1786,
the present intersection of Liberty and Congress Streets where the courthouse is now. But certainly that's the area where they picked the first courthouse in 1786 and established it a log building. And in the 1790s, that was followed by a brick building. In 1825, a Robert Mills courthouse was built here, and then in 1915, the present courthouse building was established. So there's been 4 courthouses at this location since 1786. In the 1770s and extending into the early 1800s, iron industry is the first heavy industry here. That's the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in York County, is the production of iron. Then that begins to change after the Revolutionary War when Eli Whitney patented his cotton gin variation of an earlier design in 1793. Then the production of cotton becomes a viable economic staple. And farmers in this area very rapidly adopted cotton as a cash crop, and it is purely a cash crop.
By the 1850s, cotton drove the economy of Yorkville, as York was known at the time. And in 1852, a railroad connected the town to Chester, South Carolina, and Charlotte, North Carolina, giving the town another boost. During this time, the economy relied heavily on slave labor, and the Civil War was just over the horizon. Yorkville and the people who lived here would pay a heavy price.
York County as a whole supported the Confederate States. A lot of men from York County enlisted in the regiments of the Confederate Army. York suffered greatly during the war. A lot of men came home maimed, wounded, sick. There were a lot of widows here after the war.
As the American Civil War entered its final days in 1865, Confederate President Jefferson Davis abandoned Richmond, Virginia, and fled from the Union Army. According to historians, he headed south and along the way spent a night in Yorkville. Davis stayed in the home of Dr. Rufus Bratton, but according to Jane Hart, Davis's Secretary of War, John Breckinridge, spent the night at the Rose Hotel.
This is the exact suite that he was in. And he would have come out a door over there and walked out on this porch and looked out, and the people were gathering to hear what had to be said. Jefferson Davis spoke and Breckinridge spoke.
The room he stayed in has now been converted into the apartment where Hart lives today. But she shares another connection to the historic moment when Davis came through Yorkville.
And the first Janie Hart, who's kin to me by marriage, lived over behind the Honeymoon Woods on the Hart plantation. And her husband was a major in the Confederacy. And when she heard that Jeff Davis was coming and that he'd be staying at the Brattons, and General Breckinridge, who was Secretary of War, would be staying here, she realized that Breckinridge, whom her husband knew well, would be having less care and comfort. It impressed her that she thought she would just dig up her sterling silver coffee pot, which she had buried in the backyard for when the Yankees came through so they wouldn't get it, and cleaned it up and brought it over here, probably with some of her linen and her fine cups and things, so that General Breckinridge could have his breakfast coffee out of a sterling silver coffee pot. Didn't want him to feel less than Jefferson Davis.
When the Civil War ended, 4 years of brutal conflict and ultimate defeat left the American South a dramatically different place. Reconstruction would take years and leave a lasting impact on the nation. In 9 South Carolina counties, including York County, things would get much worse before they got better.
The African American slaves were set free and were encouraged to take a role in the political process now that they were free. They were encouraged to vote. They were encouraged to run for public office, serve in the legislatures, and they did. And that created a backlash among the whites who had formerly owned all the political influence here, who had run things, basically the white planter class. And after the election of 1868, there was a lot of intimidation during that election, and that's when you really see the Ku Klux Klan taking root here. The Klan came out of Tennessee in 1865, primarily as a fraternal organization, but during and after the election of 1868, it becomes a vigilante group. It becomes a terrorist organization to intimidate blacks and also white Republicans. And York was one of the most, if not the most, violent of the counties. Certainly there was a lot of violence in the surrounding counties as well. Spartanburg was pretty bad, Chester was pretty bad, Union was pretty bad. York was really bad. Donning disguises and intimidating, whipping, and even lynching blacks, running Republican office holders out of town and threatening their lives. And so a lot of them left and never came back. And that violence prompted President Grant in February of 1871 to send federal troops into these 9 counties.
U.S. Cavalry Major Lewis Merrill and his men marched into Yorkville. Then, on April 20th, 1871, President Grant signed the Third Enforcement Act of 1871, sometimes called the Ku Klux Klan Act. The act gave the president authority to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. In simple terms,
they had carte blanche to arrest anybody they wanted to on suspicion, with no habeas corpus being enforced. Now the tables were turned. Now it was the Klansmen that were hiding out in the woods, where before it had been the blacks and the Republicans hiding out in the woods. Now the Klansmen are hiding out. When Merrill's men began rounding these guys up, pretty soon the jails here in York were overflowing with Klansmen and suspected Klansmen, and Merrill was able to effectively, within a fairly short period of time, round up most of the leaders. Now, some of the leaders fled.
it was an uneasy period for the town, but with time, prosperity would return to Yorkville.
Things are very violent. So that's a big part of our history. I wouldn't necessarily call it a high point, but it's certainly an important point and one that we don't want to forget about. And then beginning in the 1880s, the rise of the textile industry, which in conjunction with the railroads creates a rebirth in the economy, a return to some of the prosperity that the area enjoyed before 1860.
In 1915, the town of Yorkville changed officially to York, and today the city boasts one of the largest historic districts in South Carolina, with more than 175 historic structures.
Everyone who drives into York, as you drive in, you can't miss the variety of architecture. There are about 35 or 40 different architectural styles in the city.
A volunteer with the Yorkville Historical Society, Russell Probst, describes a few highlights of the group's self-guided walking tour.
The Wilson House is the original 1828 jail. It's actually the second jail that was ever built in the county. It's solid brick, and it is a federal style building. Very simple. It was designed by Robert Mills, who is a famous South Carolina architect who designed the Washington Monument in Washington and the U.S. Treasury building. There are several places in York where there is evidence of the 1886 earthquake that was in Somerville, just 20 miles north of Charleston. It was a fairly strong earthquake. And in York, we have one building that was damaged by that earthquake, and it's the Latta House on South Congress Street, which is another federal building with wrought iron around the first floor exterior. If you look at the right side of that building, you'll see a crack between the first floor window and the second floor window. After that earthquake, there are a number of buildings that were built within the next 25 years that were designed with earthquake bolts through the wall and fastened to ceiling joists. You can see those on the Yorkville Enquirer building on Congress Street. If you look down the side of the building, you'll see stars with bolts in the middle of it. The stars just served as washers for the bolts. And those are the earthquake protection bolts. But there are noteworthy buildings as you go down the street. The courthouse. Across the street from the courthouse, the First National Bank building, which is Italian Renaissance Revival. And then on North Congress Street, there's the Brandon House, which was originally a confectionery. It's a nice frame house that's a store now. That's a Greek Revival. And then the Yorkville Enquirer building, and up the street on the houses, there are a number of folk Victorian houses that are really, really fine, very large houses. We have so many of them that have been preserved. We're really fortunate.
Around York, you'll find other examples of preservation. This long, narrow warehouse building once served as the winter quarters for the Barnett Brothers Circus between 1929 and 1945. Today, it's a lumber yard, but the Historical Society restored the painted sign. Across town, you'll find the childhood home of David Finley. As an adult, he became the director of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and during World War II, Finley led a group tasked with protecting priceless art. That group was called the Monument Men.
The most impressive building is the York County Courthouse, which was restored very carefully in 2014 to 2016 by York County. The features that got restored are some of the most noteworthy architectural features, such as the clay tile roof with copper flashing. If you look at that building carefully, note just beneath the eave of the roof, there's a continuous bronze cornice with bronze brackets on that courthouse that makes a nice dark accent on the building.
We all worked hard to save this building. There were efforts underway to tear it down. It's been reopened and it's been returned to its original purpose, which is a courthouse. And court is underway and county offices are located in this building. So it's a great success story, but there's success stories all around this city.
The Rose Hotel no longer welcomes weary travelers passing through York.
The Rose Hotel was built in 1852, and it is a Greek Revival style institutional building. It was, I think, capable of around 40 or 50 guests at the time. In the back were stables where they could handle up to 100 horses.
At well over 150 years old, the hotel's exterior hasn't changed much. But in recent years, the rooms and suites were converted into apartments.
What you see now are chopped up spaces to make apartments. Every apartment is different and had to be incorporated into the structure of the building. And the building is built by Charleston standards.
Living at the Rose Hotel gives Jane Hart a direct connection to her family history and the building's colorful lore.
I have not seen her. I know she's here. She's made her presence known. I am Presbyterian. I'm very theologically straight, and I'm not a ghost person. But the lady who lived in this apartment before me warned me that in my closet there lived a beautiful young lady with long dark hair who wore a red satin dress.
And then, one late night,
she had not told me about the war-worn Southern Confederate soldier who rambles around in and outside my door to the apartment. And I had done something I should not have done. I watched a spooky movie. You don't do that when you're 67 and you live by yourself in an antique hotel. And I got in the bed and I heard rumbling and bumbling outside my door. And I got up and I went and looked out my peephole and nobody there.
back at On the Rise Bakery, Terry Krieger, who's also a member of the Downtown Business Association, says she's invested in keeping York a vibrant place to live.
We've all got our own little niche, and we're working hard to bring downtown back. The recession almost shut the town down. And little by little, we've got a few people that are coming in that are destination spots, and we want more destination spots to keep this town alive so that we can just introduce everybody and let them see what's new in York, how we're growing, and it's just a very exciting time for us here in York.
For longtime residents Dr. Eddie Lee and Jane Hart, the community will always hold a special place.
We are a city where you can breathe the history and you can take pride in where we came from. We are a community that was settled by Scotch-Irish Presbyterians and by the sons and daughters of slaves and by Native Americans who were in this area before either one of those ethnic groups arrived. So we're an old place, and you can breathe the history here.
We knew everybody in town. Everybody knew us. My daddy was a country doctor. My grandfather was a Methodist minister. My other grandfather had the big farm. This was as close to heaven as you can get on this earth.
With a vibrant downtown, historic neighborhoods, and passionate residents working to preserve its history, the city of York, South Carolina is a well-preserved architectural and cultural time capsule, waiting to be explored. Thank you for watching A Trail of History.
A production of PBS Charlotte.